Hi, and welcome to our webinar on why PMOs and product teams need enterprise architecture now. Before we begin, please be aware this webinar will be recorded and shared with you in the follow-up email. If you have any questions, feel free to submit them at any point during or after we are done with the presentation. You can find the question panel to the right with a little chat box and a question mark. Next slide, Norman. MeisterPlan is sponsoring this webinar. We are a SaaS software solution for portfolio and capacity management, from intake, prioritization through project closure. MeisterPlan's a lean and visual project portfolio management software focused on planning resources beyond the short term. Unlike project management tools that are built for tracking tasks and delivery, MeisterPlan is a true portfolio level workspace where you can plan capacity needs without all the task details, so you have sound decisions with less effort. You can integrate, though, to project delivery tools to gain better transparency in the execution. And whether your teams use traditional, agile, or hybrid methods, we can connect to many tools of choice. Where we differentiate ourselves is providing you a what-if scenario simulation to explore options and choose the best path forward. I'd like to introduce you to Norman Carr. Next slide, please. Norman is a principal consultant with 35 years experience, and it has been in many IT and digital transformation initiatives, from roles such as enterprise architecture in all domains, strategic portfolio management, application and technology portfolio management, project management, all the way through software development and business analysis. His experiences across more than a dozen different business verticals and startups to large multinational corporations, both public and private sector. His breadth of experience lends well to the topic of enterprise architecture and why PMOs and product teams need this function now. Norman, excited to have you.
Thank you very much, Debbie. Thank you for the introduction and welcome everyone to the webinar. We're glad you could take your time out from your busy schedule. Today's webinar is on enterprise architecture with a focus on the crossover with strategic portfolio management, as well as some other core elements. With that, let's dive into the agenda. We'll start with why architecture matters. So why is always good to start with, so that we get the stakeholder buy-in. What are the problems we're trying to address, why it matters to you, and that architecture should not be standalone. Next, we'll look at the life cycle, the continuum, and the pillars of enterprise change, and the touch points or the engagement points. We'll look at architecture and enterprise architecture and see what it's about. We'll briefly include a history and a composition. And then we'll look at some of the considerations in setting up an architecture practice, more particularly on the structure and the alignment within the organization. And lastly, we'll summarize and we'll go into a Q&A session. Feel free to post any questions along the way. We'll try to address those if they're relevant specifically to the slide, or we'll cover that within the Q&A session. If we don't get around to it, feel free to reach out to maybe provide a little bit more context in terms of the question, so we can provide a more focused answer. Architecture is really about aligning its cross-functional component within organizations, whether you actually have it there under that name, that cross-functional alignment from a strategic down to an operational level needs to be in place. Sometimes that's done by people without the title architect. That's not uncommon, and has especially been the case in the history. So alignment is a common problem, and there's alignment between the business and technology areas, and that's ongoing issue in many organizations. That alignment in some cases has been addressed through digital teams or creating a cross-functional team that bridges both business and technology units. Sometimes that team is broken out as a small subset where the organization kind of runs a bimodal approach to doing their operations. And then once there's progress within that digital space, they may actually then introduce that concept into the broader organization. So besides the alignment aspect and the alignment between technology and business, there's also the alignment between strategy and tactics and operations. So it's both kind of in a horizontal and a vertical alignment that needs to take place. Increasing costs and delays are another key risk item that we want to address. So that's certainly a core problem. It's certainly within the space of project management and project portfolio management. Those are common, but it's also common within the architecture space. If there's a cost or time delay, it really messes with the roadmap. There's dependencies and constraints that are going to affect the reorientating of your roadmap and the restructuring, the reprioritization of those items. Alignment and risk management can only be ensured through entrenching architecture throughout the portfolio and product life cycles. And if you do have that and you are bringing an architecture team into the place, there has been concerns that becomes a bottleneck, like potentially any team. So if you do have a bottleneck in approvals, you could use a bimodal approach with a streamlined process with well-defined pre-existing use cases. Think about case law, how in law, setting up case law creates precedent for the judging of cases that are of a similar nature. In ITSM or IT service management, there's that concept of normal and standard changes, where normal changes are what would require regular gates and regular assessment, whereas your standard changes are predefined changes that allow you to fast track those, so you avoid the bottleneck. You don't necessarily have to have every initiative and every request channel through enterprise architecture. As I mentioned, architecture is not standalone. It is part of a process. It should be embedded within the PMO. I believe as you want those checkpoints to be embedded in the process, whether they're gates or guardrails. The gates are typically manual steps, so there's always a need for some manual approval, some rubber stamping. But with guardrails, what you need to do is actually establish some automation in order to ensure that those elements are actually checked. They're just somewhat automatic or they're offline, not necessarily needing people to jump into a meeting for every discussion. So the regular suspects, scope, time, quality, common within project and product management. What we want to do is look for patterns of reuse. So those predefined standard items and blueprints that we've developed over time. We want to address the risks, so the guardrails, the decision trees, looking at the scenarios and the use cases. And with those, we want to establish value measures. So as we look at initiatives, and I use the term initiatives rather than projects or programs or requests, to kind of have a more generic terminology to address those. Those initiatives should be applied to a set of goals connected to your strategy, to strategic themes, so that you can actually measure what those initiatives are actually achieving for the organization. So early visibility is key. with it not being standalone, our architecture would have visibility to those change initiatives that are coming from the business as well as from technology teams. But they'd also be potentially be part of that actually demand intake, because they'll be looking at the roadmap and deriving key items like addressing technical debt that may be building up. We want to ensure that we understand the business. So from a capability point of view, which leads to kind of domain-driven design and integration patterns that can be used throughout the organization. Enterprise architecture is a focus on the what, and solution architecture is a focus on the how. There is an overlap, and that's part of the continuum. So enterprise architecture is really about ensuring that we are addressing the right problems for the right reasons with the right initiatives at the right time. And solution architecture is about ensuring the change increments to the business and technology ecosystem provides value and quality. We talked about this already in terms of the architecture not being standalone, but just to take it a little bit further, these are the elements that we need to build into the process. Initiative assessment. So is this initiative a good idea? What is the scope? Initiative selection and prioritization. Do we do it this fiscal, or do we defer it, or do we cancel it? What is the sequence of that? And that sequence is going to lead to your roadmap planning. And in your roadmap planning, you'll be looking at your dependencies that will affect the timeline. Then you head into solution blueprinting. Now, that's not necessarily all from scratch. If you already have reference architecture from the industry or from the vendor or within the organization already, you don't need to have to start from the beginning. If it's understood what the use case is, what the particular scenario is that you're trying to address, you could potentially use that reference architecture. Solution guidance and advisory is how do we guide the delivery? How do we provide value to the organization to ensure delivery follows design? And then feedback evaluation and continuous process and service improvement. So at each stage, gate, or phase, we need to ensure that there's feedback. We need to ensure that it's iterative and it's throughout all the way into the operational and support phases and back into strategy. Just on the idea of the difference between idea and initiatives, some organizations choose to keep those separate. Some will actually introduce the idea into the project portfolio management or strategic portfolio management tooling. That you can do by creating a separate stage gate. The only caveat is it's not a one-to-one or many-to-one. It's often a many-to-many. And so there could be many ideas that could form an initiative coming from different stakeholders. It might potentially be a one-to-one, but it's going to vary. So that's something you have to keep in mind when you're actually looking at the process as well as the configuration of the tooling. So this is a core theme. This is a busy diagram. There are several key pillars here. So on the left-hand side, we have strategic portfolio management, which really focuses on the demand and initiatives that are coming in. We have somewhat in the center is enterprise architecture, which is focused on principles, models, blueprints, and governance. And together, realistically, with strategic portfolio management, they really, enterprise architecture and SPM actually form a strong governance layer. And it is a continuum between the portfolio management and project and product management, and enterprise architecture and the solution architecture, which is more at that product and project level. The enterprise architecture pillar looks at both business capabilities and technology or technical capabilities within the organization. They'd be looking at a kind of a product level. They may help the solution architects in terms of product requirements and platform requirements. So that's a common terminology used today is platform and product. Platform is generally a little bit more on the technology side, infrastructure networks, but it is broader than that because it's also the DevOps and various other elements, whereas the product side is really more on the business value. So what is the products that we're either developing or we are purchasing? What are the modules of those systems, whether they COTS or SaaS products or custom developed products? And then the product platform and product management is really on the delivery. It's more tactical, and that will then feed into what I'd call a new current state, into the operational space, which is covered by operations and service management teams, which is really the sustainment, operations, and support of all of that. And it's at a service level, not just a platform and product level. So it's something to keep in mind. So key thing here is demand will come from both business and technology teams. Some of that demand will also come from looking at the ecosystem of your technologies and your processes within the organization to realize the debt that is building up. And that's something that enterprise architecture can help with resolving. I just want to do a quick check, Debbie. Do we have any questions coming in, or just want to make sure everyone is still
Yeah,
around?
there's one question, Norman. The question is, we have product teams that prioritize a lot of their work directly, and our PMO really focuses on the larger strategic projects. What guidance could you give product teams to know when to connect to enterprise architecture?
Yeah, it's a good question. So one of the challenges with product teams is the product has to be well defined. There's an actual continuum from agile to DevOps to microservices, whether you actually use microservices or not. But it's a common theme when you have, let's say, many squads, and you have a defined product. That defined product needs to be well defined within the organization, not only within the product team, because enterprise architecture and the PMO needs to know which initiatives need to channel to which products. Often those product teams are going to have their own team backlogs. And what normally happens is if I'm let's say, a Python programmer, and someone gives me a request, what am I going to do? I'm probably going to develop it in Python. But take a step backward, we should be asking, wait, should we be developing this in Python? Maybe it should be, maybe that's more for your data and analytics team. Maybe our backend system's .NET. Maybe those guys should be developing this. Maybe we shouldn't even be developing this. Maybe we should be purchasing it. A key example is an ERP or CRM system. Why would you be developing that from scratch unless you're a software company that actually builds those? So you want to take a step back in terms of asking yourself, do we want to actually buy, build, reuse, integrate? Do we want to partner? Do we outsource this? Do we insource this? And that makes a huge difference in terms of how that initiative potentially gets sliced up and how change actually happens. So that is one of the key things I'd say is really that domain of the product needs to be well defined, and the only way to define that is to link your domain-driven design to your capabilities, which is owned by the enterprise architecture space. So your business capabilities and your technology capabilities define your capabilities within the organization, and how the technology capabilities will map and enable the business capabilities. Hopefully that answers the question. Feel free to reach out at any time if you want to discuss further. Lifecycle engagement points. So initiative review, that would be something that enterprise architecture would need to be involved in. Now, if it's an idea, maybe not. Maybe you do want to go into potentially proof of concept on some ideas. Those proof of concepts should be kind of like a sandbox that you don't just go from, oh, here's an idea. Oh, yeah, it seems to be working. Let's just roll it through and we'll run this into production. No, it needs to be reviewed. It needs to be signed off. There's quite a line between proof of concept to POC, a minimal viable product, and a general availability production ready product. Portfolio reviews and road mapping. So the initiative review is really looking at the initiative in and of itself. And this is something, it's similar to the question that was posed is, if you're only looking at your initiative or your set of initiatives that your team is doing, that might be fine. But what is there any crossover? Is there any integrations? Are there dependencies? Is any of the teams that need to work on this, what's their backlog look like? Very common business will put in demand, even technology teams will put in demand, and the demand comes in too late, and at the last minute, oh, we need a change to the network. Well, network team is busy. We need change. We need more storage. Infrastructure team is not aware. They haven't provisioned. They haven't got the servers, or maybe they haven't moved into the cloud, so the auto scaling capability is not there. Design workshops. You don't necessarily always need to have design workshops, depending on the extent of the initiative. If you have a bunch of reference models and established patterns and approaches, you could streamline that. Some of those reference models will be coming from the vendor for COTS, commercial off-the-shelf systems, as well as SaaS, or software as a service products. And a lot of organizations have moved their ERPs and CRMs into the SaaS space. And there is a little bit of a difference between going from on-prem to cloud, and there's a difference between various aspects of the cloud, whether you're using SaaS, a PaaS, a platform as a service, or infrastructure as a service. And if you want to dive further into that, I could feel free to reach out and I can provide more guidance. Quality reviews. So your Q&A team may be involved in that, but setting up of your test frameworks, your environments, and everything is really an architectural item. If you leave it up to individual teams, you'll probably end up with a dozen different test frameworks, everyone using different languages. You want some level of autonomy, but you have to balance that with the ecosystem of hundreds of different components, all of different languages. People come and go, and you no longer have anyone that does Python, so you have to outsource it. The rate is so much more. So you've got a whole bunch of things that you have to deal with. And postmortems. So you want to capture lessons learned. You want to update your blueprints and other artifacts. Ideally, those updates are actually happening along the way. Documentation is for communication and for specification and for revisiting and reuse. If you need to make changes to the architecture, you want to refer back to those blueprints. So it is not just something done at the end of delivery. It's not just for operations. It's actually even for strategy, for reevaluating your systems. And some of that has to be automated, otherwise it's overwhelming. So the decision to reuse, buy, build is an architectural decision. New capabilities are architectural decisions. They're not a platform product team decision. That talks, I think, directly to the question that was raised. Architecture. So it's really taking us from strategy to solution and into the operational space and then back again. There are 4 pillars. This is from TOGAF, from the Open Group. there's 4 pillars: support strategy, we support portfolio, support the project, and we support the solution. So on the strategy side, we look at the change initiatives and the overall portfolio. We're supporting senior leaders. We are also concerned with budgets because that's going to potentially kill you. Support the portfolio, projects and approaches. We look at supporting the execution owners. So in strategy, we look at the why. In the portfolio, we look at the what, and we look at the collective of the whats. In the project side, we are looking at the specific initiative. And so this again talks to that divide between product and project teams versus the portfolio and enterprise level focus, which has broader visibility to what's actually happening. And one key area is in integrations. Very seldom do you have completely standalone products or solutions. They have to at some point likely integrate with other solutions. At the very least, someone's going to raise the question to say, oh, I need some dashboards and reports on this. The tooling in itself doesn't do that. Also, this is a transactional system. We do not want to run a whole bunch of reports and dashboards directly on that. So we'll create a data warehouse or data mart, data lake, or whatever, and we'll create those dashboards and reports on there. Well, that is now another big endeavor. And do you actually have the technology and the resource to support that? The solution is a little bit different to the project. This is the actual delivery. The delivery team, although they may be under the project lead or product lead or manager, they are somewhat in their own space, where they're using a Scrum Master is focused on that kind of ceremony of or elements of what needs to be delivered on time, on budget, and that. But the solution people are really interested in how do we build this thing? What does the design look like, and how do we execute, and is this maintainable? And some of those elements are going to filter from enterprise architecture as principles, as blueprints, guidelines, etc. Pipeline activities. So the architecture touch points, I've identified 4 key ones. I have those numbered at the bottom, slightly different to how they inline within the block, just to kind of elaborate a little bit more. The first one I call identify, and some of that demand I said is coming from strategy and enterprise architecture, from feedback, as well as from strategic initiatives that leadership has decided to take on to fulfill their goals and objectives. Some of that is going to be derived from looking at the capability and the maturity assessment. And then once you've done that, you want to scope what that change looks like. So you need to do a gap analysis between what your current state, so you heat map that, your current state, and then you define what does your future state look like, and that provides your gap analysis, and you build out your scope from there. Now, while that's all happening, you've got business demand also happening. So you want to correlate that, and you've got technology demand happening from technology units that are saying, oh, we are seeing performance issues, we need to scale up, or there may be ongoing technology demand, which is going to be upgrades and updates and fixes and all of those things that need to happen with your products. And some of that isn't going to be on your timeline. If they're COTS and SaaS products, they're often on a vendor's timeline. Once you've aggregated all your initiatives into one place, ideally, you can then start looking at the risks and dependencies. You can do an impact analysis where you de-risk as much as possible, look at mitigations. And then once that is done, you can do your selection and prioritization, where you look at the prioritization of those initiatives and then roadmap that out. One of the key things you want to do at that point is ensure that the value is defined. You really can't prioritize and say something actually is going to go into the fiscal budget for this next fiscal unless you actually have placed value on that initiative. And those higher value items are the ones that likely make it in. Low value items may not make it in. Sorry about that, but not everyone can have everything, at least not this year. Delivery mechanisms, programs, projects, and product increments that will then feed into that product management space, where you have the transition plan, the DevOps, the release plan, and then into your asset pipelines in the new current state. Two key components there is your application portfolio management and your technology portfolio management, which ideally are going to be automated in the sense of having a CMDB or a repository of your collection of applications and technology items like your servers that they are connected to. In the cloud space, that becomes a little bit convoluted because your application is directly tied to one place. So your way of working and your way of managing that might look a little bit different, but that needs to feed back into that identifying of the needed initiatives that actually need to come into play in the next fiscal, because if you're not addressing issues with your existing current state operations, you're going to be building up that technical debt and potentially have things breaking on you. Even if you are doing vendor provided updates and upgrades, that's not going to do everything for you. Yeah, I'm just going to pause at this point. Is there any other questions? No?
Not at this point, Norman.
Okay. So what is enterprise architecture? Enterprise architecture is a subset, I guess, of architecture, you're going to call it that. But it's also the overarching aspect of architecture. Architecture is a subset of engineering. Whether you really recognize architecture as engineering, or whether you want to recognize computer IT as engineering, that's debatable. Realistically, it is a combination of science, engineering, business, and art. Enterprise architecture is often compared to city planning. So normally we think of an architect coming in and building a building. Enterprise architecture is looking at not just the building, but the collection of buildings within the city, the placement of roads, the placement of airports, hospitals, etc., to make sure everything flows. Yeah, so EA operates at a strategic, enterprise-wide level, or it could potentially act at a business segment level. So business segments are things like supply chain, Safeway has like an enterprise architect for merchandising and marketing. So you could segment those. If your organization is large enough, you may want to do that. It defines the overarching blueprint that binds together business strategy, processes, data, applications, and technology. So the scope is really huge. And with that, they cannot necessarily do the depth. They may have come up from the ranks of domain and solution architects, but they would not have necessarily the ability to handle everything, depending on the size of your organization and the amount of initiatives you have. And therefore, you have different kinds of architects, like solution and domain architects, which will focus at a more granular level. The solution architect often operating with the project manager or product manager or product lead. Enterprise architecture is about the big picture. And the key areas that enterprise architecture focuses on is defining the blueprint, principles, capability maps, strategic roadmaps, templates, and checklists. And those are primarily for the gates and guardrails that need to be put in place. A little bit on the history of enterprise architecture, which really relates to the history of IT and computing in general. It's really evolved. If you think about it from the 1950s, systems thinking is not just about computers or IT. Almost an antithesis to that, or contrary to that, is linear thinking. We see a lot of that today. We generally tend to be linear in a way of thinking, systems thinking, you thinking about the big picture. And the problem with that is when you head into conversations, often people will say, oh, you're going on tangents, because they don't realize that tangent actually has an impact. Um, and that's part of the broad scope and why portfolio level and enterprise level management or governance is different from the more granular project and product level management and governance. 60s and 70s, they called it management information systems. Um, that's kind of where I started. Business systems planning was another concept. As you can notice, the business side of things was somewhat emphasized. Information systems architecture. We have Zachman, mid 80s, using business systems planning still. We have EA and related frameworks being developed. TAFM, ISA, DODAF, FIAF, MODAF, depending where you come from. TAFM was a predecessor to the TOGAF, which is part of the Open Group. And TOGAF is roughly used by 80% of global 50 teams. It is their kind of EA operating manual, and that's the de facto. Like any system, no system is perfect. Any process is not potentially perfect. Maybe we're trying to achieve an 80-20, and maybe that's good enough. And looking forward, we're moving into from IT centric to business centric and agile, and into adaptive AI powered and federated enterprise architecture. The pictures there is just kind of the move from mainframe to distributed web and mobile networks. That was quite significant. Actually, during I think it was 80s or 90s, Microsoft International moved their operations off IBM AS400s to Windows NT operating systems. I'm not too sure how many. I've heard various things about the number of NT operating, NT machines that they needed versus the IBM AS400s. I actually worked in one organization that had 11 AS400s distributed around the country. We had an IT team of only 40 that fully managed the support, development, and at that time it was a lot of custom development because there wasn't not a lot of software out there that did what we wanted to do. And IBM lost to Microsoft on the the microcomputer operating system market, despite the OS2 at the time being better than what Microsoft developed, although OS2 was a co-development between Microsoft and IBM. So just some history and some nuances there. Breadth and depth of architecture. This kind of describes it. Now, domain architecture, Toga took a little bit of a shift in the last few iterations, and they actually use the term segment not only for the business segment, but for the technology or segments or the technical segments of that, which includes business and process information and data, applications and integrations, and the technology items and infrastructure networks. And cybersecurity is kind of relatively new, but it actually crosses all of those elements, covering things identity and access management, of course, threat monitoring, which happens at all of those levels. Data privacy, compliance issues might be part of their take as well. The iceberg reality. This is kind of from kind of an engineering look. Architecture, design, engineering. There's obviously an overlap. They are related. A lot of people use the term design only for UX design. That's a misnomer in my mind. The user interface and the user experience is the iceberg that you see above the water, is only a small component of any system or ecosystem. The aim of the user experience is to simplify it for the customer. However, there's complexity hidden beneath the water, and it's ideally hidden from the consumer, and that's within the space of application architecture, data architecture, and the technology architecture, which is primarily your compute storage and networks. So just to realize there is a lot that you don't see for many stakeholders. Frameworks and ontologies, I already mentioned. TOGAF is kind of the de facto. Zachman is kind of more of an ontology. What it does, it provides a set of integratives and perspectives. I use that quite a bit. I use TOGAF. I do want to highlight with TOGAF that if you look in the center, there is requirements management. And so when you think about requirements management, you normally think about business analysis, systems analysis. The architect kind of evolved from both those areas, potentially the business analyst moving into business architecture and systems analyst moving into systems architecture, and together able to bring the business requirements, the functional requirements, and the non-functional requirements together. But a key component of non-functional requirements are quality attributes, which are key elements of architecture. And in the more complex distributed networked world today, that looks quite different than it used to. ADM is the process. There's 9 phases to the TOGAF ADM. I don't necessarily rely on any particular one framework. I use elements from different frameworks, and you have to adjust the frameworks to your organization. Otherwise, it's like ITIL, ITSM framework. You don't normally just apply everything at once. It's going to be incremental. You want to build out a roadmap using a maturity model to arrive at the gaps that you want to address, and then you want to prioritize those based on value and the value deemed by your stakeholders, who are varied, and that's why you have the different perspectives to understand those varied stakeholder demands and needs. Enterprise architecture is principle-based. I'm not going to read through all of this. These are very generic ones. You may establish more specific ones, but the principles really do need to be somewhat generic. As an example, business principle: maximize benefit to the enterprise. This is well known. Investments should provide maximum business value. Well understood, probably applies to every organization. There may be principles that you derive that would be very specific to your organization. Cybersecurity, as an example: system information must be secure, at rest, and in transit, and accessible to the right audience. These principles help you to actually derive strategies. For instance, you might arrive at the principle of, or the strategy of, cloud first. You might be vendor oriented to a particular vendor, let's say SAP first, Microsoft first, and there may be a particular reason. You better have a rationale for a strategy and define that. So principles are key. And with that, once you develop a strategy, you can develop strategic themes, which links to your goals and objectives, which can help with the alignment. And you can apply that to all your initiatives. Then you're in a better place to track the value delivery throughout your life cycle. Without a dedicated architecture team, okay, so we don't have anyone that's an architect. Do we need? Well, titles are one thing, roles are another. You may have engineers, but at the same time, you don't want to bring in all new people, because you're going to lose a lot of the business knowledge and technology knowledge that's already developed by your staff. So you have to be extra careful with that and balance your insourcing and outsourcing components. You can use part-time architects. You could embed those architects within the teams or squads. Consultants can bridge the gap, and they could jumpstart the process. There are fractional, part-time, or full-time engagements that you can involve with. I actually do all of those. I'm currently on actually a full-time engagement, but am looking for potentially fractional. work where I can jump in and out kind of long term with the organizations where they need help on architecture, strategic portfolio management, or any other related area, digital transformation. Architecture light aligned with PMO light. Yeah, just like blueprints, use industry and vendor reference architectures. Don't need to reinvent the wheel. Checklists and templates. So those assessments, evaluations, the transition plan and test plans can be developed. Lightweight catalogs, principles, quality attributes, and logs. So there's something called rate log, which covers risks, actions, issues, and decisions. Decisions is a key one. Decisions are point in time ones. You better put in your rationale for the decision at the point in time, because people are going to look back and say, what were they thinking? And when they look at the rationale and they look at the context, they'll realize, okay, that was the right choice at the point in time. However, the context has changed, and therefore we need to move along and change things. So I think that is key. Light use of tooling, lean PPM, lean PM. For example, Masterplan and Jira. You can build an integration. You can allow for value tracking throughout the life cycle. You might also even go into your DevOps areas, track it in all the way into the release of a particular feature into production, and actually have tracking based on tags or other discovery elements to actually track the production use of that feature. But it has to then be well defined in terms of the domain and the feature structure. And of course, when you go into the new current state, it's no longer a single item. It's integrated into the existing ecosystem. Just briefly on scope and responsibilities of architects and engineers. Enterprise architecture looks at vision, standards, roadmap. The BDAT architect, which is business, data, applications, and technology architects, are looking at the design, taking the standards, roadmaps, blueprints from enterprise architecture or from the segment architecture, and utilizing that. They should be working well closely together. That provides your architecture continuum from a organizational perspective, and then there's the architectural continuum from the kind of industry reference and vendor frameworks that you include in that continuum. And then on the continuum, we go from the solution architect working at the product or platform level, and the DevOps engineer, which helps in the delivery and release of those. So the actual implementation and governance is actually across the different levels. Aligning the organization. I'm just going to pause, see if there's any questions, or at this point I see we going on with time, but I think we're doing okay.
No questions, and we probably have about 5 minutes, Norman. Thank you.
Oh, 5 minutes. Okay. So we'll go very quickly. Alignment. So your structure of your enterprise architecture and your and the PMO office. There's a key architecture will help with the implementation, or at least with the structuring of the portfolio, the channeling of those, the continuum from the portfolio level to the solution level. And service management will help with the monitoring and serving and supporting of those platforms and product increments that actually take place, and the overall current state, or the new current state. I just want to highlight some things with this. Business teams, technology teams. There's two elements here, at least in my mind. We continually discuss business technology alignment, but still in many organizations, these teams operate independent. So many organizations develop a kind of a digital alliance to help do a digital transformation, and these are groups that are brought together from different teams or different resources from both business and technology teams that help to bring that together. Sometimes they dissolve later, or they incorporate into the new model as the organization is using this bimodal model. So this is something one can use in the organization. And of course, business is focused on process, and the technology is focused on process automation and tooling. In my mind, those are intricately related. Process changes may impact technology downstream and vice versa. So sometimes business says, oh, we don't need to notify technology teams because this is only process change. It could be a data change. It could be a business rule change. It could be it even could potentially be a configuration change in kind of a no code, low code environment that could have direct impact on other processes and technologies that are further downstream and even potentially upstream. Very quickly on starting or maturing the architecture group, you can have centralized, decentralized, or hybrid EA models. Where you start might not matter. It really depends on the size and maturity of the organization and any architecture, engineering, or design resources. And a lot of it's also cultural mindset. Ideally, as you mature, you move into a more hybrid EA model, where you actually have a central EA group looking at the enterprise and business architecture, and you have the domain and solution architects potentially distributed. Now, some organizations will have domain architects centralized, and that works if you want to actually have a lot of kind of more of that stage gate reviews of your architecture and of your initiatives, and maybe you cannot afford to have architects across too many different business and technology units. So you may want to centralize that. And just a summary, intake, enterprise and solution architecture provide blueprints, the feasibility checks that SPM and PPM, strategic portfolio management and project portfolio management, uses to decide to fund. What are we going to fund and approve? Gates and guardrails, stage gates approvals hinge on the sign off. PM drives the detailed preparation of those gate reviews. Guardrails streamline the process but require defined use cases and automated policy checks. So that's going to take some work. Bimodal streams within the pipeline allow for fast tracking standard changes. And on the execution front, EA tracks overall architecture health. SA pilots patterns at the program, project, or product level. Strategic portfolio management identifies and monitors portfolio-wide constraints and risks, and the project or product management delivers the initiative and feeds back status and risks. Probably a little bit more project manager. Product manager is going to be a little bit more ingrained with the vision of the product, but it's at a product very at a specific domain level or segment. And then just to close out, enterprise and solution architecture harvest reusable assets. The portfolio management side evaluates the return on investment across the portfolio, and the project or product management captures lessons at that project or product level. And that is about it. If there's any questions, please feel free. You can reach out at any time. There is a QR code here where you can actually do a feedback. We could potentially post this. I just wanted to mention below the QA with these slides will be going out. There are some additional items on quality attributes, domain scope responsibilities, and on enterprise lifecycle ecosystem. A little bit more detail there. There's the collect, decide, execute, which ties into the master plans, lean PPM. And that is it. Any questions, any feedback?
Norman, that was a lot of information, and I know enterprise architecture can't do justice within 1 hour. So definitely appreciate everything you've been showing here. You know, it sounds like enterprise architecture plays a critical role in making the right design choices. And You can have a dedicated team or a hybrid model as you're kind of starting out or maturing. And it was some good insights as to where it fits into a strategic portfolio process. So I'm assuming if someone is looking for some services or guidance, we can also be sure to share your information with them. Any parting words from you, Norman? This was some good insights for those that didn't know enterprise architecture too well.
Yeah, and I try to simplify it down. Of course, there's a lot involved. It's very broad scope. Architecture is really broad. Enterprise architecture is often the kind of the governing body. There there may be enterprise architectures focusing on specific areas, or they may be very broad. I've been in both those roles, um, at the lead and kind of chief architect level. Yeah, it. Not a whole lot to say over and above that. Thank you very much for attending. Do feel free to reach out if you want to discuss anything. You have anything on your plate you're looking to do, strategic portfolio management, enterprise architecture, or digital transformation. I can help provide some guidance on that. Thank you very much for attending. And there will be this survey. Hopefully, you can fill it in. We'd like to get feedback on the content and the delivery, and what you got out of this. What are your takeaways? Thank you very much.
Thanks again, Norman. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Debbie. Bye now.